Welcome to today's Explainer. We're jumping right into Genesis chapter 14. And let me tell you, this chapter has one of the most abrupt, fascinating shifts in the entire book. Up until now, the text has been giving us this deeply intimate family story, right? We've just been following along with the family's tents, their altars, and some internal squabbles. But then, suddenly, with zero warning, the camera pans way out, and we are looking at a sweeping international war report. So let's dive into it.
So, what actually happens when an intimate family story violently collides with ancient geopolitics? Well, absolute chaos, that's what. We are suddenly dropped into a brutal battle involving 9 different kings, a massive international coalition, and this deadly fight taking place in a valley that is literally filled with tar pits. It's a massive clash of empires, and honestly, it feels entirely out of place from the family narratives we've been reading. But it's here for a very specific reason.
To really grasp the stakes of this war, we've got to look at the timeline, because this conflict didn't just pop up overnight. Genesis lays it out with the precision of ancient war annals. For 12 years, 5 city-states of the Jordan Plain, which by the way included Sodom and Gomorrah, were living in forced servitude to a super-powerful coalition of eastern kings. In the 13th year, those 5 cities finally decide to rebel. And then, in the 14th year, that eastern coalition returns with an absolute vengeance to completely crush the rebellion.
Now, you might be wondering, who gets caught right in the middle of this? Abram's nephew, Lot. And if you track his trajectory, it's honestly pretty tragic. Remember how Lot made his choices earlier in the story? He chose purely by sight. First step, he just looked toward the well-watered Jordan Plain. Step 2, he pitched his tent towards Sodom. And now in this chapter, Genesis tells us plainly, he actually dwelt inside Sodom. 3 steps, 3 chapters, each one inching him closer to disaster. Because when the city falls to these eastern kings, Lot falls right along with it. He becomes collateral damage and gets carried off as plunder.
Okay, so here's where things kick into high gear. Word reaches Abram that his nephew has been taken captive. And Abram's response? It is staggering. He doesn't go out and raise an army of thousands. He takes exactly 318 trained household servants. Think about the sheer audacity of that. 318 guys pursuing a victorious multi-nation military coalition that had just wiped out 5 kings. It's incredible. He divides his super small force, attacks under the cover of darkness, completely routs the enemy, and recovers absolutely everything. All the goods, all the people, and most importantly, his nephew Lot.
This moment brilliantly illustrates a massive shift in who Abram is becoming. I mean, just think about the contrast here. Not that long ago, down in Egypt, Abram lied out of sheer fear to save his own skin. He compromised just to protect himself. But now here in Canaan, he is decisive, he's courageous, and he is literally risking his life to save a nephew who, frankly, had selfishly taken the best land and walked away. The guy who once grabbed for safety is now laying it all on the line for someone else.
Which brings us right into our next section, 2 kings on 1 road. Because, the real heavyweight moment of this chapter actually isn't the war itself. It's what happens on the journey home. The dust is settled, the captives are freed, and as Abram is walking back, the pace of the narrative just abruptly slows way down. He is met on the road by 2 kings. And these 2 leaders coming out to meet him couldn't be more vastly different, polar opposites. On one side, you have Melchizedek, who brings bread, wine, and a spiritual blessing. And on the other side, you have the king of Sodom, who brings a highly transactional business proposition. 2 kings, 2 very different offers. And how Abram responds to each of them in this single moment is going to define exactly who he has become.
Let's unpack this first king, because Melchizedek's entrance is easily one of the strangest and most mysterious moments in the entire text. He literally appears completely out of nowhere. His name translates to King of Righteousness. He is the King of Salem, which means peace, and is very likely an early name for Jerusalem. But even more astonishing, he is the priest of God Most High, or El Elyon. Think about that. Here is a Canaanite priest king, completely outside of Abram's family tree, who already knows and genuinely worships the true God.
The details of this little hillside encounter are just incredibly profound. Melchizedek brings out bread and wine, which is this beautiful image of provision and refreshment after a grueling battle. He blesses Abram and he blesses God, specifically calling God the possessor of heaven and earth. And in response to all this, Abram gives Melchizedek a tenth of all the spoils. This is actually the very first tithe recorded in the Bible, and it's given entirely voluntarily, centuries before any religious law ever demanded it.
Now, why do these 3 short verses in Genesis matter so much? Because they cast a massive theological shadow. Fast forward 1,000 years, and Psalm 110 prophesies about a coming Messiah who will be a priest forever according to the order of Melchizedek. Later on, the New Testament book of Hebrews builds its entire framework for understanding Jesus on this exact moment. You see, Israel's priests had to come from the tribe of Levi, but Jesus came from Judah, so how could he be a priest? The answer is Melchizedek. It proves there was a totally valid priesthood before Levi even existed, based on an eternal order rather than strict family ancestry.
But man, right after this profound spiritual high, we get a sharp pivot. The king of Sodom steps up and makes his deal. Give me the persons and take the goods for yourself. Now, by the customs of the ancient world, this is actually a wildly generous offer. Abram won the battle. He was completely entitled to all the plunder. Taking this deal would have legitimately made Abram enormously wealthy, right there on the spot.
Yet Abram's response is an absolute flat-out refusal. He says, "I have raised my hand to the Lord, that I will take nothing, lest you should say, I have made Abram rich." Notice the phrasing there. I have raised my hand. Past tense. Abram had made a protective vow to God long before this temptation ever even arose. He decided in advance that he was not going to let anyone else claim credit for the blessings God had promised to provide.
And you've got to love the connection he makes here. Abram brilliantly takes the exact phrasing from Melchizedek's blessing and weaponizes it as his defense against the king of Sodom. Melchizedek said, God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth. And Abram repeats it word for word as his theological reason for refusing the wealth. He's essentially saying, look, if my God owns heaven and earth, I don't need a single piece of Sodom's money.
This whole sequence perfectly sums up an amazing transformation. The man who previously lied and compromised in Egypt to protect himself now risks his life to save his wandering nephew, and then refuses a literal fortune purely out of faith. It proves that his past failure didn't finish him, it formed him. He's growing. He's learning that when you let go and truly trust the God who owns absolutely everything, you don't have to grasp for anything. As we wrap up this explainer, our source material leaves us with a really beautiful, reflective closing prayer that just captures the heart of this text so well. It says, Father, thank you for a chapter that shows growth is possible, that the same man who failed in Egypt could stand before a king and refuse what he didn't need because he trusted you to provide. Teach us to decide in advance as Abram did so that when the offer comes, we already know our answer. Thank you that you are God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth, that everything already belongs to you, so we never have to grasp. It continues, make us the kind of people who go after those who have wandered, even when they brought it on themselves. And thank you for Jesus, our great high priest forever, who brings us bread and wine and blessing. In his name, amen. What a powerful takeaway from such an ancient story. So let me leave you with this. Will you decide your convictions in advance, or will you wait for the king of Sodom to make you an offer? Think about that. Keep learning, keep growing, and I'll catch you in our next explainer.